Hey, good morning everyone, and welcome to the PivotBoss Pre-Market Report for March 10th, 2017. I'm Frank Ochoa, aka PivotBoss, and here's a look at the daily time frame of the ES right now. What we mentioned in the previous session was that we probably needed to see the ES drop down into the previous week's low, which was 2357s, and we would likely see a push down into that level and as low as 2350 I mentioned. And that's where we could begin to see some sort of rejection that brings us back up and perhaps establishes some sort of key range. And what we saw in the previous session was just that. Price dropped down, hit 54s, and then started to work its way back up by the end of the session, leaving behind a nice rejection tail here at the previous week's low. Already the midpoint of that session being defended at around 61s. That's a zone that bulls want to continue to keep bid. 70 remains a major level here, and given the current range from this high to this low, if 61s continue to be bid here today, that would imply at least a push into about 77.5, that midpoint of this range, to solidify that as perhaps a key range to watch for the upcoming days and weeks ahead. So right now we have NFP report coming up here in about an hour. That's going to be important. That could sway this thing big time in either direction, but the key level, the key pivot to watch is going to be 76.5. Does price close above or below that pivot today? That's going to be very important because there's been a major rejection of prices above it. If price rallies above this pivot but then rejects it, that could be a major indication that we could be seeing more selling pressure ahead. So that's going to be the major pivot to watch as we head into the weekend for the ES on a longer term basis. Now here's an intraday chart of the ES. At the moment we can see strength here, a very, very bullish return off that 2354. Price bounced up, higher low off of 56s, and then price rallied back to VWAP and then continued onward. We had a gap down here and a continuation to the upside here in after hours trading and pre-market, and currently VWAP is trending to the upside. So overall strength at the moment. Price is attempting to hold above 70s, which would provide additional strength toward 77.5, that upper target. Again, 76.5 is going to be the major pivot here, and holding 61s overall will be very important for bulls. Breaking below this will give a very, very negative tilt to the rest of the day. All right, let's take a look here at crude oil. Crude oil has had a very, very eventful couple of days here. We've seen a significant sell-off. This all began again with our indication last week. Last week we were talking about how these bulls up here in the upper half of this range were not getting paid, and that could imply a move into this 51.71 target and the lower edge of this range. And so we followed that this entire way. We've seen rejections of previous highs. We've seen rejections of midpoints. We've seen price blow through support levels, and this thing has just gotten a major, major dose of volatility here. And so far what we've seen is price see a day of 200 and 300% of ADR. And when you see that happen, you tend to see a day here where you digest that recent move. So after this big sell-off here, we've established a large range off of this low. We may begin to see just sideways action, and right now we have a range on the day of just 49 ticks heading into RTH. That's 40% of ADR. Average 10-day range, given the last couple of sessions here, has increased from under $1 to $1.24 per day. So right now we could be looking at some sideways action. However, given this is what I mentioned to our room, and I mentioned this last month also in a market outlook, given all of this energy that's been pent up in here, if we see significant expansion from this range, which we currently are, the implication would be a release back toward value, and that's 46.69, and that's just value. There's a shot to see a move to the opposite edge where there's rejection. That could be anywhere below 43 and as low as 39. So this is a lot of energy that's being released. Any bounce back toward 51, 51.50 could still be a significant selling opportunity for a continuation to the downside. So we're going to see how this continues to develop, but this recent break in violation of this significantly tightly coiled range there could imply much more selling pressure ahead. So it's going to be important to see how this plays out. bounce is likely to be defended at the moment. All right, on an intraday basis, here we are. On an intraday basis, we have a very narrow range. This narrow range here spans from 49.80 to 49.31 at the moment. Fading new highs, fading new lows, likely the course of action. Short term, in terms of a short-term range. But the wider range is the bigger play here. You can see the LVN here about 50 up to 50.20, and then you see the lower edge of the range 48.5 to about 48.70. That's the major band. So if price gets into this zone, it could be a fade back. If price gets down to this zone, it could be a great fade back up. So that's the larger range, and right now the lower range could be used for short-term fades back within the range toward value. All right, let's take a look here at the NQ. And instead of the pivots, I'm going to bring up my ADR method. And my ADR method template here shows that over the last 5 days, the previous 5-day range right here was very, very narrow compared to average. So, and compared to anything over the last year, that range was about 40 plus points, 43.5 points over a 5-day period. It had been averaging 77 points on a 5-day range average basis. And that's about 56% of average range, and that implies that we could be looking at major expansion ahead. I mentioned to our group yesterday heading into today to watch 53.80 for signs of expansion, and we're starting to see that push begin at the moment. Now, any failure to stay above 53.80 will be significant, but right now, pushing and holding above that level would suggest a continuation. And at the moment, we have, based off of the weekly low right now, our primary upside target is going to be 54.0675. So 54.0675 is the primary weekly upside target. If we can stay above 53.80, we could push to this end here very, very soon with a continuation perhaps down the road. But 53.80 is going to be the early pivot to watch for the day. And again, heading into NFP, we'll see how that plays out. All right, taking a look at the intraday chart right here. One thing I was looking at early on was 53.70 and the release of energy that we've seen from that level. 53.70, a big time level. That's where the previous week's close is. That's where the previous session's close is. You can see how bears had been defending that zone. And right now we've seen a release of energy through it and into 53.90. So right now, any pullback toward 53.70 will likely be a great buying opportunity for at least a return back toward 53.90 and a shot at seeing more strength toward that 54.07 target. Lastly, let's take a look at ZB. Here's a look at ZB. Let's look at the higher time frame with the pivots. One thing with ZB right now is we've seen significant weakness. This is what I mentioned before, is that there were big bulls that were defending here. Likewise, bears defending here. Once price was unable to get back above 149.24, there was going to be a big release of stops to come. And so in the room we were talking about all these big bulls defending and how that doesn't just mean we're going to drop to 147.12. Perhaps we could be going down to 146s, maybe even lower. And so 146 is still on the horizon here. Any pullback into the previous session's mid and the low from 2 sessions ago will be a zone to defend. That's 147.08 and as high as 147.12. So we may see a bounce into that zone, but any bounce into that area likely to be defended for a continuation on a swing basis. On an intraday basis, let's take a look here. Let's bring up a 233 tick chart, and what you'll see right now is we've seen a continuation to the downside, a failure to hold key level support. You can see how price bounced off this key level several times, but bulls were getting paid less and less each time, and eventually price gave out, made it resistance right there, and then price dropped lower. So 147.12, rather 147 right here is a key pivot early on to push through, and if price gets into that 147.08 to 147.12 zone, it could be a fantastic swing selling opportunity for bears. All right, that's it for now. Let's see how this plays out heading into the rest of the session. Good luck, trade well, and happy Friday.